welcome to another episode of I Made That. I'm your host, Chloe Emme. I Made That podcast. Welcome to another episode of I Made That. I'm so excited, you guys. Today we have Chris Kaufman. We've had a bunch of scheduling conflicts. He's finally here. So he's most widely known as a co-founder of StockX, where he served as the chief creative officer and helped the company reach a $3.8 billion valuation. He has since moved on to his next venture, ArtClvb, which I'm really excited to speak with him about. And him and his team have created this platform that merges art and culture with digital mediums and provides traceability for art pieces that really leads to a more fair payment standards within the artistic community. So he's a graphic design and branding maven. He has served on countless boards and led investments in businesses that are women and minority owned. He is an advocate for the city of Detroit and, most importantly, a Michigan native as well. Please welcome my guest, Chris Kaufman.
Thanks, Chloe. So good to be here.
Excellent. So for those of us that are maybe not so familiar with your insane record, can you run us through, can you describe what you do in your own words?
That's a really tough question. It's a lot of stuff. Primarily my background has been in creative design, branding, but a lot of it is problem solving. And when it comes to early stage startups, whether it's one that I am co-founding or investing in or advising, it's a lot about solving problems, and some of that comes from experience, some of that is experimentation, but it's about trying new things and moving forward and hopefully making progress that's going in a positive direction. But that's it's a lot of what I do. At StockX, I was leading our global creative team, where we were doing all of our marketing creative, all of our brand design, photography, campaigns, retail design, basically anything you could see was flowing through me or someone on my team. I continue to do a lot of that. ArtClvb has been a similar thing where I'm doing a lot of design work, helping the team solve problems, playing more of an advisory role there, not so deep in the day-to-day as I was at StockX. Also writing a book on vulnerability and leadership. I'm teaching a couple days a week, doing a lot of advising. So kind of redistributing my time a little bit, not doing 14 hours a day on one startup, but sometimes doing 14 hours a day on a lot of different things.
I love that. So it sounds like a lot of what your kind of specialty is processes and like understanding how to put teams together and kind of delegate. I guess before we get too deep into that, the first place my brain went when you said everything that you could see as far as StockX, how much of your hands did you have in creating the little green tags that come on something when you order it from StockX? Like the last time I ordered, they were like a plastic, almost like monogram tag. And I love that. I love packaging. So
yeah, every single part of that. Going back to 2015, 2016, when we really kicked it off and started thinking about verifying products, what that was going to look like, what was going to be that thing that really signaled to people that something was StockX verified and could build trust, and really create some brand reputation at the same time. Started looking at the hang tag, and that was a process of experimentation. In the beginning, we tried doing a rectangular hang tag that it was still the same material, but a little taller, a little larger. And then we realized that you had to be careful with certain shoe materials, specifically suede. You didn't want, even a dull corner on a rectangle rubbing up against suede. So then you kind of went back to the drawing table and changed the design. But that whole process was, essentially drawing it out, finding manufacturing partners, working with factories, figuring out how to do injection molding, designing security features into it. So if somebody, did take it off, they couldn't put it back on. Some other features in the tag that, we can identify on our end, whether it is a genuine StockX tag or not. So there's a lot of technology that went into it, and that technology got better over time, and it was a lot of trial and error. Had never designed a verification tag for anything before, so a lot of it's experimentation and finding the right manufacturing partners to do things like that. Yeah, there's definitely far more sophisticated technology embedded and designed into that than meets the eye, which was a big part of one, we wanted to make sure that it was secure on our end, but more importantly, we wanted to be able to guarantee that our customers were getting a quality product, which was the most important part.
Definitely. So when we start talking about Art Club, I know you and I kind of chit-chatted prior to this about how that unfolded, but I would really love to speak about your time at Cranbrook and just what that kind of era of your life brought along with it. So first of all, I guess we should probably explain what Cranbrook is, because I think you and I both grew up in Metro Detroit, and Cranbrook is such a staple of the community. It's such a wonderful art school. But can you dive into what Cranbrook is and then what your experience with Cranbrook was?
Yeah, so I'll start with how I ended up there. I hit a point a couple years ago where I realized, I've always been a creative person. I've always loved design and art and creating work. And I came to this realization that I was spending 14, 15 hours a day on Zoom meetings. And as a creative, I was spending a lot of time working on budgets and spreadsheets and quarterly reports and quarterly reviews and all these things that, I learned a lot from, but they weren't super fulfilling. The thing that I was doing that was still really fulfilling was working with my team, building my team, solving problems there. But as StockX grew into a global company with nearly 2,000 employees, there's a lot of process involved. And with that process, you start moving a lot slower, and for good reason. When you are a 5-person startup, there's very little risk to moving quickly and breaking things and experimenting. When you're doing billions of dollars in business, if you break something, it can cost the business a lot of money. So you naturally kind of get into that mode where you don't move at the same pace that you used to, which I just don't enjoy nearly as much as kind of early stage, being scrappy, resourceful. And I decided I wanted to get away from that. I didn't necessarily want to start another business. I didn't have an idea that I was really super passionate about at the time, but I also knew that I wanted to do something. So I decided that I wanted to do grad school. It was something I always wanted to do, didn't necessarily have the time to do it. And, I hit a point where, towards the end of 2022, I was going to be in a position to finally do that. And for some crazy reason, I decided I was going to do 2 grad degrees at once. I always wanted to do my MFA. Cranbrook was a place that I always wanted to go to. I never knew that I would have the opportunity. When I was younger, that was certainly never in the cards for me from a time or economics perspective. But I always wanted to do my MFA in the 2D design department there. Elliot Earls has been the artist in residence in that program for a couple decades plus. He's someone whose career I followed in the 90s and really admired, and had this fascination with 90s graphic design, whether it was from Elliot or April Greiman or Rick Valicenti, Chip Kidd. These were all people that I followed in the design world, and finally got to a point where I could do Cranbrook, and Elliot is still there. Thankfully, got to have that experience with him. Simultaneously, I decided I was also going to do a master's in learning and organizational change at Northwestern, because over my career, one of the things that I've been obsessed with is people and culture, and how vulnerability and leadership and knowledge sharing and organizational psychology and building really good cultures around teams really impact the bottom line of the business, the success of the business, the well-being of people. And it was an opportunity to work with like-minded people who were interested in the same things. And I thought, well, if I'm not spending 14, 15 hours a day on Zoom anymore, why not do 2 grad degrees at once? So I did. And for 2 years, I was doing both of those. I finished at Cranbrook this past May. I've got 1 more quarter after this one to go at Northwestern, and I'll be done there. One of the things that happened during my time at Cranbrook, which was really how my connection to Art Club came about, was there's an event called Open Studios every year where the public can walk through students' studios. Usually the students are there and kind of talk about the program, talk about their work, talk about their philosophy, some of the things they're doing. A couple of artists had come into my studio, my partners at ArtClvb, Steve and Dorota. And we just started having a conversation about art, the art market, being artists and creatives, what that looks like, especially in the Detroit area where it is so tough for an emerging artist to make a living. Even established artists, it's really tough to make a living. I've talked to so many artist friends who, on paper, if you looked at their work, if you looked at their careers, you would assume that they're doing extremely well, and the finances match the success that they've had with their work. And in many cases, that is not true at all. It is really hard to make a living as an artist. And I know people that have incredibly established careers that they're still doing gig work to supplement their income, and they're driving for Uber and delivering DoorDash and whatever else they can do to essentially finance their art career. And one of the challenges is galleries are typically hyper localized, meaning that if there's a gallery in Detroit, their biggest market is going to be Detroit. It doesn't necessarily give most artists an opportunity to market their work outside of the region, outside of the state, outside of the country. So one of the things we started talking about was like, how do you really open that up? And it seemed like the obvious answer to that was some kind of online or app-based marketplace where you could, really build exposure, across the country and across the globe. And another part of that was really, the economics of the gallery model, which in most cases, galleries take 50% commission on artist work. It doesn't matter what business you're in, if giving half of your income to, someone to essentially sell and market your work, your margins are probably not going to be great. And this is, something that we found with artists, and started thinking about, okay, well, if we can build a better distribution system and marketing platform and community, we can definitely bring down the commission. It modeled it out around 15-20%, far better than 50%, because you're targeting a much wider audience. You're building a community that lives outside of the gallery. And I think one of the most important parts that we've talked about that will make that model work is going after a market that doesn't even realize it's an art market. These are people that are spending significant amounts of money buying, what I would call wall decor from West Elm or Restoration Hardware or Crate and Barrel. And in some cases, these pieces of art are, and I say art lightly because it is mass produced. They're, essentially prints. There are pieces that cost certainly thousands of dollars, and in some cases, $6,000-8,000+. And you can go on the Restoration Hardware website and find some of these pieces, and you can click on the little quantity drop down, and you could add 60 of them to your cart, and they're $6,000-8,000. And I think there is a market of people that they don't necessarily know how to select art. They're not comfortable doing it. They don't know where to find it. So they go to sites like this and they buy things that are easy to pick. It's limited selection. It's relatively neutral. But what they don't realize is they could have an original piece of art that is an appreciating asset. Most art appreciates. Anything mass produced is almost guaranteed to depreciate for a fraction of the cost of what they're paying for this mass produced wall art. There are many cases where you can buy a beautiful piece of art from an emerging artist for sub $1,500, sub $1,000 mark in many cases. And it's original, it's unique, it's one of one, it's special. It in many cases, it's local, which is important to people. If you're in Detroit, to have a piece of art from a Detroit artist is a really great thing to own, and it has meaning. So we really want to open that market up. And part of that is finding ways to help people select art. So, some of that may be leveraging AI, allowing people to scan their room with their phone. And instead of putting people through a process where there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of pieces of art on a website and a marketplace that they have to endlessly scroll through and eventually, in most cases, get fatigued and can't make a decision and don't end up buying anything. What if, based on their budget, their style, the size of their room, we could come back and say, here's 12 pieces that fit your aesthetic, they fit your budget. The scale will work with the size of the walls in your room. Pick one. So that's a longer term solution, but it's a big part of the art club philosophy, and it's empowering collectors and artists alike. And there's a huge educational component that comes into that on both sides, where for collectors, it's about how to select art, why to select art. If you're doing it from an investment perspective, what should you be paying for it? What can you expect that value to look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years? And from an artist perspective, something that I have 2 art degrees at this point. None of them really teach you how to market, how to sell, how to price your work. And that's something else that we want to solve with the platform, and especially building that community on the artist side, is creating these educational tools for artists to learn how to price their work. What does that look like at different levels of experience and pedigree and education? And so much of what goes into that is what collections are they in? Have they been a part of any museum or corporate acquisitions? Did they do an MFA? Where did they do it? All of these things impact the value of work, but nobody really knows how to quantify it. So, we want to help solve that problem and make that easy, and make sure people aren't overpricing their work. And, in that case, it will sit, it won't sell. More importantly, not underpricing their work and leaving money on the table. That happens a lot too, because people just don't understand their value. So it's really an integrated approach to the art market, and thinking about it from every angle. And ultimately, how does it make the experience for artists and collectors?
All right, there's a lot to unpack there, lots of golden nuggets. I think, first of all, one of the things that really stood out to me from that I have come across as well, and it's honestly one of the things that led me to start this podcast, was to find a deeper understanding of why are there all these insanely talented creatives out there that have the wildest resumes that you can think of, and they're not completely booked out, and they're not making a decent living. That blows my mind. So I think that was like one of the big things for me that I really enjoyed about the idea of Art Club, is that it kind of looks to balance out some of that. I think another thing that you really touched on in that whole explanation was the fact that you don't get taught how to price yourself as an artist. And that's a huge piece of it. But also having this community that makes it easy for art collectors to find you. Because like you're saying, you can go on and search all kinds of art at these large retailers. We don't really have anywhere like that for connecting to local artists. So it's a lot of having to find individual websites of individual artists. And I could see the fatigue really setting in, especially if you're not somebody that is used to seeking out art. It's almost like a service that you would probably pay somebody to go find art for you to select. So I think having a concentrated community of artisans in one spot is really interesting as well. So I guess, kind of to piggyback off of that, why do you think that art is so undervalued, or like artists are so undervalued?
Well, I think there's a few things that come into play. One is access. Some people have trouble finding work, or building that economic model. One, because sometimes they can't find people, right? They don't know where that market lives, and in many cases, that market may not be in their backyard. Detroit is a good example. There's a ceiling, and it's not a huge market. But there's a lot of really talented artists here producing, really incredible, compelling work. But they haven't found their market. And I think on the flip side of that is there's a lot of people, and this isn't specific just to fine art. This is specific to creative in general. There are a lot of people that need help, whether it's sourcing fine art or with design, video, photography, content. They don't know how to find those people, and the people that can do that work don't know how to find them. There are some freelance sites out there that do an okay job, but there's nothing that I have seen yet that's doing a really good job connecting high value clients with high talent creative. And you run into the same problem that I was talking about from a discoverability perspective, where nobody wants to scroll through hundreds or thousands of pages of products to try to find what they want. It's very similar when it comes to, one, finding a creative, or two, finding that creative work that is out there. Because how do you find that person? How do you scroll through one of these sites where in some cases there are tens of thousands of freelancers, and if you have no training in art or design or creative, how do you know what's good? How do you gauge who a good designer is going to be or a good videographer is going to be? So that's a problem that hasn't been solved at this point either. And it's kind of similar to the problem that I hear from so many people in business, especially startups, which is, I'm not an engineer. How do I find a good one? You can send me your code to review, and I have no idea what I'm looking at. How do you know if it's good or bad? And there are a lot of people that, from a creative perspective, just because they have a set of eyeballs in their head doesn't mean they are capable of discerning what is good work, bad work. And even if they can discern what is good work, well, how do you know if the person producing it is going to be somebody that you want to work with? How do you know that's going to be a good working relationship? So there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of unknowns. Unfortunately, so much of it is decentralized. It's really hard to know even where to start, which can be incredibly frustrating and demoralizing when it comes to that process.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think those are a really good breakdown of kind of where those pitfalls are. So thank you for that analysis. Okay. So I know we have, kind of spoken about what you've done up till now with your career. Can you walk me through what part of working as a creative professional you struggle with most?
That's a great question. I think for me, a couple things come to mind immediately. One is any kind of creative by committee can be incredibly challenging, incredibly frustrating. Creative work is a unique place where a lot of people feel like they should have an opinion on it and should have influence and say in the decision-making process. And this goes back to, just because everybody has a set of eyeballs, they think that they can critique and give input on creative work, even though they may have no expertise or knowledge of the strategy or the end goal. So much of it is completely subjective. It's really hard to quantify creative work based on opinion, and that happens a lot. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where things have gotten completely derailed because there's one marketing VP that has a certain feeling about the color blue. Even though it has no impact on anything else, there's nothing strategic there. There's certainly no empirical evidence to suggest that it wouldn't work, but it's no, my whole life I haven't liked the color blue, or I like rounded buttons better than square buttons, or there's so many things that come up that is completely personal opinion. And I think the frustrating part of that for creatives is they're looking around and saying, well, nobody's sitting over the shoulder of somebody in accounting being like, I don't like how you set those tables up, or I would use different Excel shortcuts if I were you. That can be really frustrating. I think that's why the second part of it is knowing how to get buy-in and knowing how to navigate the politics of that. There's no broad brush approach to this at all. It varies organization to organization. There are some places that they're really good at giving creatives autonomy and trusting them and, really allowing the creative team to do what they do best. And when that happens, almost universally, amazing work comes out of those organizations. And there are others that you can tell they are way too hands-on, and everybody who has a title gets an opinion and gets a say, and it's way too democratized. And that's where committee comes in. And, when you're making everyone happy, the work suffers and the work gets diluted, and, it loses its edge. And, I think a really timely example of the way to do this really well is looking at the Harris campaign right now. Going back to 2016, the Hillary Clinton campaign had about 12 levels of approval processes for any kind of creative to get out the door. What that does is that, it not only creates a lot of bureaucracy and dilutes creative, like every time it goes through another level of opinion, something is getting changed that wasn't necessarily the original intent of the work, but it also really slows things down. So, when you go through 12 levels of approval, it's usually going to take weeks to get something out the door if you're lucky. And, in a political campaign, that's really critical time when you're trying to be relevant. You're trying to capitalize on things that are happening real time. It makes it really difficult. But the Harris campaign has done a really good job kind of completely upending that philosophy. They have given their creative team almost complete autonomy to make decisions and to release work quickly. And, I believe the person running their video is in their mid-20s. They have a really good handle on what types of things resonate with Gen Z. They're able to put content on TikTok incredibly quickly. I think a really good example of why this works and how powerful it is last week when Donald Trump was speaking in Detroit and said, if Kamala becomes president, the whole country is going to look like Detroit. In less than 24 hours, Kamala's campaign turned around a really polished, well-produced, compelling video ad, challenging that assumption. When you look at it, it feels like it took weeks or months to produce, but the fact that they turned that around in less than 24 hours really shows the power of creative autonomy and, really trusting your creatives to do what they do best. And all politics aside, it is just a really good example of organizational effectiveness and empowering people to create really amazing work. And, if that same thing had happened during, the 2016 campaign of Hillary Clinton, it would have taken that team weeks to respond to that. And by the time they did, it would no longer be relevant. If this same mindset could be applied in corporate environments, and, again, there are a few that are successful at that, but, across the board, it would go a long way, one, for creatives to feel fulfilled and like their work is meaningful and to eliminate, some of that stress and frustration and really empower them to produce the best work. But, on the other hand, I think it would give businesses a lot of opportunity to put out really compelling brand work that sets them apart from the competition because they're actually giving their creatives the autonomy to create the things that they're good at doing. But I think, those are the two hardest things. And those are the things that over the course of my, 20 plus year career have not changed much. It's kind of rinse and repeat when it comes to some of that stuff. You see it all the time. And it's, I think it's probably the most important thing for creatives to learn how to navigate. But again, you got to know the dynamics of your team. You got to know who has influence. Essentially you have to know how do you navigate the politics of that because it's slightly different everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's really relatable. Kind of to preface this, I focus on working with small businesses predominantly because I find that I don't get that autonomy like you're speaking about when I do work with corporate clients. And while it's really cool to have those names in my portfolio and to get to go see your stuff, out nationally or more like out in the world than you might see from a smaller client, it does strip away a lot of the creativity. And it's almost like when you're hired by those teams, you have to go in and know that okay, it doesn't matter what my taste is or what my creative inclinations are. I just have to go understand what these people want and deliver that for them. And that does take a lot of the fun out of the process versus, getting to work with these smaller businesses or smaller teams that will basically be like, I trust your taste. I hired you because I like your portfolio. I like your natural design aesthetic. And that's what we want. So give us what you would do in this instance. Those are the most fun projects to work on. So I think, totally on board with everything that you said. I think that all really resonates for me as well.
Well, I'm sure something that you've run into as well with larger clients is how much contradictory feedback you get through different levels of the process. Where you get four people that say something's great, and then like the last person comes back like, I don't like that. It doesn't work. For whatever reason, it creates a lot of back and forth. It creates a lot more work for the designer or the creative, and hopefully they're billing by the hour in that case, and they're going to make a little bit more money off of it. But that's usually not the motivation at all. Most people I know would far rather put out their best work than get paid more. People that do these things for a living are typically not in it for the money. They're in it for the love of the work and the passion they have for the work they do. The money is an added benefit that comes with that work, but there's just nothing more soul crushing than having work go out with your name on it that you're not proud of.
Yeah, no, it is. I think, again, to your point, when you get like the committees together, I personally find a lot of times we end up with kind of like Frankenstein versions of what we've given them. So it's like, okay, well, we really like this from concept one and this from concept two. Can you put those all together? And it's like, I can, but like, should we? So it's hard. So, I mean, at least it's relatable. Okay. What piece or product that you have personally made are you most proud of?
There's different things that stand out for different reasons. I would say the StockX brand refresh that we did a few years ago really stands out to me because of the process that was involved in that. That was one where, again, there were a lot of people involved. We were working internally, externally, not just designing a new logo, but creating brand guidelines around that, voice guidelines around that, and then doing the switch over. So you had a lot of moving pieces. You had the authentication tags, you had signage, you had postcards that would go in the packages, you'd have the packaging, the invoices, everything on the website, everything in every one of our physical spaces. So that is a really difficult process to manage and to figure out, and it takes a lot of coordinating of people across the globe, to really make that work successfully. And I think it's one of those things where no matter how well you do it, there's still pieces that fall apart. There's things you miss. There's facilities that don't follow the timeline or don't switch over when they're supposed to. So you run into those things, but I think from a process perspective, that is one that I'm really proud of. And then there's one that's kind of a fun one that was a really unexpected project. Back in 2016, LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers won the first not only NBA championship, but championship for the city of Cleveland in I think 5+ decades. And at the time, we were still in the very early days of StockX. We sat right outside Dan Gilbert's office, owner of the Cavs, also co-founder in StockX, and large investor. It was time for the Cavs to design their championship banner that would go up in the rafters of the stadium there. They must have put together 1,000 options. And
oh my God.
And Dan didn't like any of them. He came out of his office and he grabbed me and he's like, I don't like any of the options for the banner. It's like, we've got 10 minutes. Can you make something? So like literally like after talking, I've got like 8 minutes left at this point. I quickly throw something together. He looks at it. He's like, love it. Let's go with it. And it hangs in so I designed an NBA championship banner in like 8 minutes. So, sometimes it's like stuff like that too, that like you don't spend a lot of time on. You don't even know you're going to do it. It just pops up out of nowhere and becomes like one of the coolest things that you've ever worked on. And then, there's a bit of a full circle moment, recently where with StockX, we, finally signed a deal with the Pistons to be the jersey patch sponsor. It's like another really cool bucket list moment to see, the team that I've loved my whole life and, grew up watching, and, now my logo is on the jersey, which is pretty cool. And, like some of these are points of pride and some of these are just like, oh, that's really fun. Like, never thought that would happen, type stuff. But like one more thing with like that 8-minute banner project is, and I think this is a really good reminder about the creative process and about, how you build your skills over time as a creative. And I want to emphasize that like something like that only takes 8 minutes because you've spent thousands of hours before, like building that knowledge, building those skills to be able to do something so quickly, which is why sometimes client work can be really difficult to price, because you may take 1,000 hours coming up with a logo. You may take 3 minutes coming up with a logo. Do either of those logos have a different value? Like, I don't think so. And like it's accomplishing the objectives for the client. Like they love it. It hits all the points of their strategy. It represents their brand. And that, that can be a problem when you're billing hourly versus on a project basis. But that, that's why I would say like project basis. And if it goes out of scope, then you have some like hourly plan to go up with, go against that just to make sure you're not losing revenue. But I think, I think like that knowledge and that skill that people build over time sometimes isn't valued as much as it should be. And a lot of times like people are quick because they've put a lot of time into becoming quick and to, understanding scale and composition and color and contrast and how all of these things play together, where they can do something in less than 10 minutes that might take a less experienced designer days.
Yeah, I think I like personally, I call that like preparing to be lucky. So I think there's a lot of serendipity in creativity. Obviously, that was an excellent example of you preparing for that. You have all these skills, like all this knowledge, you're in the right place at the right time. It just so happens that your business partner is the owner, of this team. But all of that wouldn't matter if you had not been honing your craft that entire time. So I think that's a really fun, really inspiring stuff like that just like fires me up. I think it's so cool to hear those stories like that and know that it can happen, and it makes it worth it, like getting up early and like staying up late and really working on these things and wanting to do better for yourself, even if it's not reflected currently in, the job that you're working at. Oh, I'm not getting paid more for this, but I'm still working on myself. I think that a lot of that stuff leads to cool stories like this. So thank you for sharing that. That was a really, really good example.
And it's also a good reminder that, to your point, most of what we do, no one ever sees. Like it is very much tip of the iceberg, that actually goes into production, and the rest is drafts, versions, experimentation, learning that no one sees but us. And there's that joke where it's like final dot ps whatever. And it's true, because it is such an iterative process, if you're doing it right. And there's so much from a growth perspective that experimentation plays into, and it takes a lot of time, and most of the time you're not getting paid for. I think the biggest creative breakthroughs I've had is something that I'm stuck on that comes to me in the middle of the night, and you get up and you start working on it, and those are some of the greatest learning opportunities I've ever had.
Yeah, I think for me, when I really need to think something through or find inspiration, I go for a walk. And that allows me, it's like I don't bring the phone. I can just be fully present and I'm sitting there just kind of walking through things. And I get a lot of good ideas on walks. Actually, I've gotten a lot of good ideas walking around Cranbrook. So their grounds are beautiful. It's such a special place.
People have epiphanies in the shower because
Yes. Shower thoughts.
they're held in isolation from distractions, the outside world, right? Like you can't pick up your phone and look at a text or an email in the shower. Like, and for a lot of people, like the sad thing is it's the only time they disconnect. And then they're like, I always have these ideas in the shower. I don't know why. It's like, well, yeah, like try turning your phone off or leaving it in the house and going for a walk. And don't walk. I would say like don't walk around the block because you're going to be tempted to stop and pick it up. Like walk as far as you can, and then you're forced to walk back before you even get back to it. And if you can do that for an hour a couple times a week, like even a half hour a couple times a week, you will be shocked like how much clarity you find, like how many problems just kind of like self-resolve in your head. It's a really powerful thing to disconnect and can be incredibly generative.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. Well, I could literally talk to you for like 2 more hours. You have so much fun stuff to talk about, wild stories, excellent insight. But we are going to wrap up with my favorite question that I have to ask everybody. And I feel like you're going to give me a really good answer. So, no pressure. Okay. What is the wildest story that you can tell me on this podcast? It can be about anything.
Ooh, that I can tell you.
Yes, the you're not going to send anybody to jail. You're not going to like break any NDAs.
I mean the wildest one was probably when Kanye came to visit us at StockX.
What year was this? Is this when he did like the CCS trip and there's all the clips of him?
This was the same, yeah. So the things that I can reveal there, you have already seen. There's videos online. There were a lot of interesting like climbing up on tables and saying completely unhinged things. But my my favorite moment of that day, well, there were two favorite moments of that day. One, there used to be a Tim Hortons in the lobby of our building. I happened to be coming back down to the first floor. We've got like a little underground sneaker store for like team members and VIPs and special guests and stuff. So it was coming down for that. And, Kanye has a big entourage and handlers and security and, is typically surrounded by 10 plus people. But there was a moment coming down where got off the elevator, he goes through the turnstile. For some reason, he kind of like quickly separated himself from the group and ran into Tim Hortons. And I could see all of the Tim Hortons employees just like looking like deer in headlights, staring at him. What the hell is going on right now? Like Kanye West is standing in this random little Tim Hortons in Detroit. And all he says was, "Sup," and turned around and walked out. And it was like one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. Like that was, yeah, it was one of the weirder things to happen. And then, I mean, there were so many like cool things, just like Eminem's involvement in StockX and, being able to shoot creative with him and have him as an early investor, actually one of our first investors. But the Kanye thing really stands out. And the second thing with the Kanye thing was when he was visiting us, there was a moment where like he had a question that he thought we weren't maybe equipped to answer, but anyway, so he tried to call Elon Musk because I think he confused StockX with SpaceX.
A lot of X's flying around. Got it.
But like typical Kanye stuff, it was funny. Definitely, like definitely one of those like random stories that you think would never happen to you, and you're like, oh, like, yep.
So I've had people give me off camera their wildest story involved Kanye, but it never involved Kanye and Elon Musk. So thank you for that.
You know, you get them both in the same story. It's hard.
I love it. So I know that I promised that was the last question, but I just remembered something when you were talking about being in the StockX building. I just thought about this. I haven't been to Detroit in quite a while, but last time I went down there, I feel like there is a huge cause statue in front of the building. And I'm going to assume that that doesn't belong to Quicken Loans, that was probably the StockX floor that got that there. Is that accurate?
No, it's actually a part of Dan and Jenny Gilbert's art collection. So they acquired a couple cause statues. There's a smaller one that is on our floor there, and then there's obviously the big one that faces Campus Martius. You know, they're big supporters of the arts, and Jenny is a huge collector, and she's actually chair of the board at Cranbrook. So, you know, very, very involved in the arts, and they have an incredible collection, and that's a part of it. So,
Very cool. I didn't realize. I would have assumed that it was something that you guys had purchased to bring to like sit because it obviously ties in really well with StockX. But that's amazing that it's a part of their actual personal collection, and they were like, "Oh, this is a great place to show it off."
yeah, we're still, well, I mean, at that time, still was very much in startup mode. So making an acquisition like that wouldn't have been very fiscally responsible for us. But you know, when you're in the same building, you definitely get to piggyback on some of those benefits, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you sitting down and sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great being here. Let's do a follow up sometime with the rest of your questions.
Yes, definitely. All right. Well, I will let you go. Is there any socials, websites, anything you want to shout out? I feel like we should definitely tell people where to go find Art Club.
Yeah, you can find Art Club on Instagram. Easiest way to find everything is to go to artclub.xyz. It's ARTCLVB. You know, you'll find the socials there. You'll find links for downloading the app. But yeah, everything you need to know how to you know, buy art, find art. If you're an artist, you know, get on the platform, sell your art. You'll find it all there.
Excellent. All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.